Evening, everybody. I volunteered to give this talk tonight, and I'm not really sure why, because talking about the return of Jesus is normally about as popular as talking about politics at a party. So I don't know why I volunteered for this one. As we talk about the return of Jesus, maybe you've never really thought much about this idea. Maybe you've heard about it, or you've heard it shouted about as you've walked through town centre in some part of the country. The reality of the return of Jesus to many of us can feel as probable as getting hit by lightning when you leave tonight. It can feel as far off as a distant galaxy. But here's the thing, as I've thought about the return of Jesus, I think the return of Jesus touches on an underlying fear that lots of people today in society have. That ultimately, somehow, in some way, a dark end is going to come to the world. And so for you, it might be the return of Jesus. But for other people, and let's be honest about this, for many people in Europe, many people I've spoken to, there's a little bit of an underlying fear at the moment in Europe that Vladimir Putin might just be crazy enough to press the big red button and go nuclear. It's an underlying fear of a potential dark end. Or if it's not that dark end, maybe it's a global warming weather disaster, or even global financial ruin that would cause starvation for millions of... There's all of these ideas, isn't there? Or then there is this fearful idea of the return of Jesus. And as someone said to me recently, they said, Robert, I don't really believe in God, but I want to keep an open mind, because imagine if I just went around living my life and then one day I really did meet God and there was a God and I was on his bad side. Well, I don't want to be on God's bad side on the day that I meet him. And the truth is that the idea of the return of Jesus is associated ultimately with a day of accountability. It is called by many people the day of judgment, because according to the Bible, Jesus will return one day to judge the living and the dead. That is all people who have ever lived. So saying that is a huge statement, isn't it? And so, of course, there are a couple of comebacks that some of you might even be thinking already. Firstly, why does Jesus think he has the right to judge anybody? But secondly, why is anybody actually even going to believe in the return of Jesus ending all things? Why should anyone believe that? Who's going to be crazy enough to believe that? Well, tomorrow we're going to think about a little bit about why Jesus gave us the Bible, why you should give that book any of your time, why I think we can trust the Bible. But there's a story that Jesus tells in the Bible, in a part of the Bible called Luke chapter 20, that I want to introduce us to tonight. And it's actually on the sheets that you've got on your table. So if you want to just glance down and have a look at that, that would be helpful. Jesus tells this story. It's a parable. Jesus' parables were stories with a point. And he says this: a man planted a vineyard. So imagine a beautiful, gorgeous vineyard taking up acres of land. And he rented it to some farmers and went away for a long time. So here we have a businessman, probably making megabucks, making millions, raking it in. He decides to move his family to Spain or wherever it is, just for a nicer life. Business will take care of itself at home. And so at harvest time, he sent a servant to the tenants who were renting his land, so they would give him some of the fruit of the vineyard. So the deal that is shaken on is, forget a monthly bank transfer. I don't need to be paid that way. You just give me some of the produce, some of the fruit of the harvest, and that will be my payment. I'm happy with that, says the owner of the vineyard. I get to enjoy it, my family get to enjoy it, or sell it, whatever. Here's what happened. As this servant comes to collect the fruit that the owner is owed, what do the tenants do? They get their iron bars out, they beat him, and sent him away empty-handed. Now the guy thinks to himself, that's really not good. But I'm a rich man, I've got my own private security, so I'll get one of my big heavies out. He can go, I'll get one of the big lads to go and get things sorted out. Someone who can handle themselves. So verse 11, he sent another servant. But that one they also beat and treated shamefully and sent away empty-handed. Still he sent a third, and then they wounded him and threw him out. So verse 13, the owner of the vineyard said, what shall I do? What shall I do? Here's what I'll do. I'll send my son, whom I love. Perhaps they will respect him. Now the son of the owner is willing to go because he wants to bring reconciliation and resolution. It's his dad's business. This is the son. And before we think, why is the owner sending his own son if he's just going to get beaten up like the rest of them? This is a respect culture that Jesus is telling this story in. So, all right, the servants, they might get a kick in. We don't care about them. They're lowly. But the son of a wealthy businessman, everyone's going to treat him well, right? So the son, off he goes to help his dad out, takes the contract in hand, ready to make the case. But here's what happened. As the son approaches, the tenants saw him and they talked the matter over. Guys, this is the heir, they said. Let's kill him, and the inheritance, the whole vineyard, all of the business will be ours. We'll make millions. So they threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. If you've been following this story, in some ways, as we get to this part, it's quite a frustrating story, isn't it? It feels unjust. It's not right. So these guys are just going to take the land, take the property, and get away with it. Bit like how many of us feel about Vladimir Putin right now. So Vladimir, you can just bulldoze through any country you like and get away with it scot-free. Just go into Ukraine, you can squat there and just take the land and get away with it. Well, thankfully, some countries, whether you think they've done enough or not, have responded to Vladimir Putin. Whether they've done enough or not, there would be something wrong if we just let Vladimir get on with it and there were no consequences. And in the same way, lots of us have an inbuilt desire for justice when we see people just getting away with it. My dad was, growing up, he was never really a fighter or anything like that. But there were many circumstances where I saw my dad get in the middle of fights and try and bring peace, especially when there was an injustice. If there was a lower party who was facing something that they shouldn't have to face. But we all have this sense of justice within us, don't we? There's a guy I know who spent quite a lot of time in prison for some quite serious stuff, and I've met other people who've said similar things to this. But he told me this one day. So this is a guy who's been in prison for doing some bad stuff. He said, but let me tell you this. There are 3 crimes that are absolutely the worst that you should never, you can do what you like really, but there are 3 crimes you shouldn't commit. Firstly, never abuse a child. Secondly, never rob an old person. And thirdly, as the vicar of a church, I like this one, never rob from a church. I don't know how that one got onto the list, but I'm happy with that one. The truth is, we all believe in right and wrong and justice. But here's the thing, it's always interesting, isn't it, that our sense of right and wrong and justice will always be limited by our own perspective. And it's what makes the question of Jesus judging the world and holding us to account so difficult. That's why this is such a difficult thing. Here's the thing with the tenants. I bet the tenants had a really strong sense of right and wrong, morality and justice. I'm sure that they justified their actions through Marxism or communism or something. And they said, look, we're all little Robin Hoods here. We'll steal from the rich and give to the poor. It's fine. It's okay. We'll just justify ourselves. I'm sure they did. But it's a limited perspective. Often we talk about how our actions relate to other, how I relate to Dan over there. Some of us believe it only really matters how we treat those closest to us, our nearest and dearest. That's what we say. That's what really matters in life. The problem for the tenants of the vineyard is whether they liked it or not. Here's the thing. There is an owner to the vineyard. The vineyard belongs to someone. And so they can look on the horizontal level. They can look at their relationships with the other. They could have been a great band of robbers. They must really have loved each other. But they need to look at the vertical. What about how they related to the boss man, the one who actually owned the vineyard? And so here is the simple but profound question for us, all of us tonight. What about how we relate to the boss man? Not the owner of this vineyard in the story, but the owner of the vineyard that we call planet Earth. How do we relate to him? Who is God to think, who is Jesus to think that he has the right to judge anyone? But is he not God, the owner of the vineyard called planet Earth? He is the owner. It's not rocket science, is it? If he's the owner, then he has that right to judge, to hold us to account. But here's the real question lots of us have. If that is true, if there really is a God, of course he has the right to hold us to account. But here's the question. Have I really treated God that badly? Have I really been like those tenants in the story? Well, here's another question for us. When was the last time that we truly paid the owner of this world the due respect that he deserves. When was the last time you really looked closely at the rules of the contract? The rules of the contract that say this: love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your mind, and with all of your strength. The rules of the contract that say, love your neighbor, and Jesus described neighbor as pretty much anyone out there, as yourself. You see, we left the story of the vineyard, didn't we, thinking, where's the justice in this? But it does come, because the story didn't finish. If you look down at those sheets again, here's how Jesus finishes the story. What then will the owner of the vineyard do to them? He will come and kill those tenants and give the vineyard to others. These guys ultimately are accountable to the owner. And in the same way, we are accountable to the owner of this world. God says one day he will send his son to hold the world to account, a day of judgment, a day of accountability when all of our deeds will be judged. Now, that might well be a fearful day. We'll come to that in a second. But let's just remember, this is a really good thing. This is a really good thing. What does it mean? Nobody will ultimately get away with it. People who have done wicked and evil things will not get away with it. Adolf Hitler will not get away with it. Your abuser will not get away with it. They will be held to account. But then the rubber hits the road. What about me and you? See, I can justify myself quite happily if I'm only accountable to myself. But if I'm accountable to God, the owner of the world, then there's good news and there's bad news. What I deserve ultimately is for the owner of the world to punish me for the size and the seriousness of the crime that I've committed. Standing up to the owner of the world saying, I'm happy to live in your world, but I don't care about you and I'll do it my way. I'm happy to trash the joint. I'm happy to do with the relationships around me as I want. I don't care about what you say. Sticking two fingers up at the God who made us and gave us this world. See, the Bible has a serious consequence for being a tenant of this world who is like that. And the Bible calls that serious punishment, and Jesus really does talk about this, if you didn't know this. The punishment is called hell. Now, there's many descriptions in the Bible of what hell is like, but it is a real place of punishment. And however it's described in the Bible, I can assure you it is not a place that anybody wants to be, or that I want anybody to be. And so if that is true, that there is a reality of a hell where people will be punished, does that not leave us tonight asking this question? If I am the tenant, aren't I done for? Like if really I have broken the rules of the contract, then isn't that it for me? But the wonderful news tonight is this, that the day of accountability, according to the Bible, is also a day of great mercy. You see, the same Jesus that we're told will one day come again to judge the living and the dead is the same Jesus who's already come into the world to save sinners, to show mercy by dying upon a wooden cross and taking a punishment that I deserved, so that through that, as I call out to him, I can receive mercy. And so the mercy of Jesus opens up a way to a better destination. Yes, Jesus says hell is a real place, but yes, there will be one day a new world where all who've called out for the mercy of Jesus will live under the perfect, wonderful order of Jesus. But very briefly, as we finish, this just leaves us with that second little question, doesn't it? Who is Jesus to think that he can judge anybody? Well, he's the owner. But who is anyone to believe that this day will actually happen? Let us be honest, it does and can feel far off and out there. But only when you forget that the far off and the out there has come so near. Notice what happens in the story of the vineyard. Warnings are given. Warning lights are flashing. Messengers come. 1, 2, 3. And then finally, the Son himself comes. You know, there are many reasons that I would give to believe in God. There are many reasons I would give to trust what God says. And there are many reasons I would give to trust in this day of accountability. But here is one great one. because the Son who will come is the Son who's already come, proven himself to be trustworthy and true through all he did, through all that's written about him, and finally through his resurrection. If we can be so confident about the first coming of Jesus, which we can, then we can be sure about the return of Jesus. And it's knowing about this day and responding to it properly, even tonight, crying out for the mercy of Jesus. See, the reality of meeting him face to face is fearful and should be fearful for many people. But today, of all days, it can be a hopeful day for us, for all who call out for the mercy of Jesus and put their hope in him. Thank you very much.